excited to have everybody. Thank you, Jonathan. So I am, uh, there might be a couple more people trickling in. I see just a few more in the main room still getting it figured out. But I am Veronica. I am the treasurer of NYCMER. This is my fourth year. On the board. Jonathan Millard, our vice president, is going to be helping moderate my room today. It is being recorded. He's already started that recording so that we can share it out as a resource for you later and for anyone that wasn't able to attend today. I'll also be sharing out the slides and the resources that I'm going to share with you today. So looks like everybody got into the breakout rooms. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I will have the chat open if you want to interact there. It's kind of a short session and we have a amazingly big group. So I'm not going to really be able to do like an introduction of everybody, unfortunately. But I'm very excited to have you all here. And our focus today is going to really be for those folks that are planning and running programming. So educators or want to learn more about how to plan a budget for a program. So we're kind of thinking small scale today. It's a really good introduction to budgeting. It's where I started learning how to budget and learned like what all the words mean and how do I know if how much I should spend on a program or what we should charge for it or how many participants we should have to make sure that we're not losing money or spending more than we're bringing in or potentially bringing in. So I'm going to kind of go through those things with you all today. Share my screen. All right. Sharing my screen does mean I only have a single screen today. So it does mean that I cannot really see what's going on in the chat. So Jonathan, if you could help me out with that, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So as I said, I am the treasurer of NYCMER. So I have done all of the budgeting. I do all the budgeting for NYCMER for our organizational budget, which is not that big, but still powerful. And then I am also manager of education at the Bronx Zoo, where I do more, I manage part of our budget, like just our programming OTPS budget, which we'll learn what that means if you don't already know. So overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to go over some budget vocabulary, kind of basic budget vocabulary. This is going to be a little bit, it'll be introductory. So it's not going to be like every deep level thing that you need to know or might ever hear talked about in budgets. Lou's presentation is going to go in deeper to some of that vocabulary and terms and things. If you want to look at that later or switch rooms, he's doing grant stuff. And then I'm going to introduce you all to one of my favorite program budgeting tools, which is a margin sheet. So we'll kind of go over what a margin sheet is. And then my hope is that we'll do some practice with margin sheets, give you all some time to practice with a margin sheet towards the end. Okay. So what is a budget? I'd love to hear what you all consider a budget. What does that mean to you? You can say it out loud or put it in the chat.
Like a list of expenses, but also what you're going to pay.
Okay. List of expenses. Any other thoughts about a budget?
It's calculated based off of what you've paid or what you've spent in the past. So there's a forward-looking aspect and a past.
Yeah, so you might incorporate, you gain knowledge about your current budget from what you have spent in the past. Yeah. So overall, a budget is the estimated revenue and expenditure for a set period of time or a specific, thing, event. So it is both components, right? So yes, we talked a lot about the expenditures, but it is also important to understand your revenue and what your revenue sources are, as well as how much you're going to be spending. Those are both part of your budget so that you can meet whatever budgeting goals that you might have. For many nonprofits, net zero is what we're shooting for, right? We're not necessarily aiming to make money overall when we're thinking about organizational budget. But for a specific program, you might be trying to use this revenue generating program you do want it to make money because it's going to help pay for something else that you maybe don't have a budget for, or is a free program or something like that. So you're like balancing out those things. So we're going to be focusing just on programming budgets today, and keeping it kind of small as an introduction. So we talked about revenue and expenditures kind of being the two sides of a budget. So revenue is the total amount of money being brought in by a given source. In an organization like ours, our cultural institutions, that's often ticket sales, membership fees, grant awards, donations. There could be a lot of different revenue sources for the institution as a whole. For programming sides, it's usually tickets, right? Or, registration fees are our main revenue source. Unless you have a grant funded program, and then you should go to Lou's talk. And he's going to talk all about that. But we're going to focus mostly on, or specifically on registration based programming, where the registration fee is the source of revenue. And then you have the expenses side, the other side, and that's the total amount of money spent by a given source. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Revenue is pretty straightforward. The money that comes in is the money that comes in. In our context today, we just have one source of revenue. So that's pretty simple. But our expenses, when we're really thinking about the total cost of a program, there's a bunch of different things we have to think about. So the main two categories of expenditures are personnel services, sometimes abbreviated PS, and other than personnel services. I did not name that category. It is a standard naming convention for budgeting, often abbreviated as OTPS. So if you hear that term OTPS, that's what it stands for. And basically it means everything that costs money that's not people, the people doing the work. So you have your staffing costs, which is your personnel services. Personnels can be your actual staff members that are full-time, part-time, could be like a per diem educator, or if you have like a guest person coming in, like in our programs at the zoo, we might have zookeepers that are helping us. They don't, like, their salary doesn't come out of our main budget normally, but if we have to pay them overtime to stay late for a program or come in early or something, then we might cover that overtime through our budget, and that would be, a personnel expense in our program planning. For example, this happened a lot when we used to run overnights. We had to have, extra staff that stayed on for security and maintenance and, electricians sometimes. That's very complicated. That's a much, much more complicated program. We're going to stick with a simple program today. And then the other piece of personnel services that is important to remember, and that might take a little bit of research for your specific organization, is fringe. We're going to talk a little bit more about fringe in just a minute. And then for the OTPS, there's kind of two categories within that as well. You have fixed things, which is something you only have to spend money on once, and then if you're running, it's a reusable resource basically. So like, we'll go through some examples when I show you the margin sheet, but things that are fixed might be if you need to buy tables, you're not going to just use those tables for that one program, right? They're going to be there for a while. Or if you need to buy reusable cups or something, or plates, or, some kind of a specific container for something, those are things that are going to stick around. Puppets are a good thing, things that last for a while and that you'll use for other programs, or like running this program more than once. Variable expenses are things that are consumable mostly. So this might be art supplies. How much you spend for that program will depend on how many participants you have. And then that supply is going to be gone. You'll have to buy more of it for the next time you want to run that program. So that could be art supplies. It could be snacks. It could be things, handouts that you have to print out. Any of those things that you're giving that are getting used up or given away that you aren't going to be able to use again in the future. Any questions so far about expenses? That's sort of the most complicated piece.
I have a question. So for personnel services, it says staffing, wages, or salary. Like if you're running a classic educational program at a museum, are you expected to cover salaries that are like covered by the institution? Is that calculated into it?
Yes, time,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
staff time, you have to consider staff time of how long does it take. And again, we'll dig into this in more specifics and you'll kind of see how you plan that out in the margin sheet. But you want to make sure, because somebody has to write the curriculum, right? Somebody has to prepare the materials. Somebody has to set everything up and clean everything up. So it's more than just the time it takes for the actual program, right? Like if you have a 1-hour program, yes, you have to pay, the program should cover the cost of that 1 hour for staffing, but it also should cover the cost of how long it took to get ready for that program.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And then wages or salary is just, part-time versus full-time words. Wages is like the hourly pay. A salary is more for full-time folks that, their pay is based on a year, what they get in a year for a base of 40 hours a week, typically. 35 to 40 usually in New York. We don't really need to go into that stuff. That's not as relevant right now. That's information that you would get from, as you're thinking about it, that you would get from like your supervisor or department head person would have that information. And you don't necessarily for a margin sheet have to know everybody's salary or wage rate. You can make, as long as you kind of have a range or an average, because that can get kind of sensitive for like position levels. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely, like I said, when we look at the margin sheet example. But I do want to just talk about fringe for a second, because that one was a new concept for me when I was learning about margin sheets, of what fringe is, what that means, how do you calculate it. But basically it is sort of all those benefits that cost the organization money but aren't part of the actual salary or basic wage rate. So things like if your institution covers all or part of your health insurance, if you get paid holidays, or if they have an employee assistance program, or other things like that employees can benefit from, whether part-time or full-time, that you don't get directly as money to you, but that you do get, that you do benefit from. So these are typically incorporated into a budget as like a set percentage of the hourly wage. I have the margin sheet I'm going to share with you set up to calculate it automatically. So that percentage might be different for different types of employees. So typically there's a set benefit rate, like fringe rate for full-time staff, a lower usually benefit fringe rate for part-time staff. And at least at our organization, a lot of times the union, if there's union staff, that fringe benefit is different from other non-union staff rates as well. So that again is something we can estimate, but also is going to differ by institution because it depends on the benefits they offer. So that would be a number that you would need to get from, again, your department head, or your supervisor can help you kind of figure out where to get that information. So margin, talked about all the revenues and expenses. Margin then is just the difference between the two, right? So whatever set source you're looking at, you're going to compare the revenue and the expenses, and then you want to see which expenses, it helps you know what expenses are usually met, or if you're going to make a profit. So basically, is the program that we're thinking about, is it going to lose money? Is it going to make money? Is it going to break even? A margin, that's the margin. And a margin worksheet is a budgeting tool that can help you determine that, where you hit that margin. So because that is hard to imagine, we're going to look at one. We kind of gone through some of these things, but as the components of a margin sheet are going to be your staffing costs and your supply costs, so that OTPS. You're thinking about the preparation time, the implementation time, any contracted services that might be needed, are all going to be part of your staffing costs. That would include like interpretive services, if any of those are required, or accessibility services. And then your OTPS is going to include everything else, basically. So your marketing, your materials. Materials is what we typically think of, but it can also include some of these other things if there's special uniforms that go with it. Like for camp, we have camp shirts. So when I'm doing margin for camp, I have to include the uniforms in that because those are different than our typical uniforms. And our campers also get those shirts or a special shirt. So that gets included as well. Printing, I didn't put snacks on here, but if you don't consider a snack a material, you might list that separately. That could be included in here too. Any food that might be included. So let's look at one. Can you all see the margin worksheet?
Yep.
Yep. Is it readable or is it tiny?
You could zoom in a little bit, but I think it's fairly legible. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
That's better? Okay, great. Okay, so this is a template that my supervisor, many supervisors ago at this point, created that I have kind of modified to make a little more generic because it was obviously very specific for my organization. But it does have all of the formulas kind of already built in, and I am going to share this template with you all so that you can utilize it. I just asked you to make a copy for yourself. But so this has space for the expenses. So it breaks it down, as I talked about before, to staffing. Here it has it separated for full-time and part-time with that fringe here. And as you can see, it fringe auto calculates. For our organization, currently the fringe percentage is 37%. So this is set up to automatically multiply, add that multiplier in. So you could just go in and change this number right here, the 37. Average fringe in New York for full-time is about 30%. So you can always start there if you're not sure where to start. And then for part-time, that fringe is typically lower because they usually don't get paid holidays, usually don't have health insurance, or if they do, the subsidy is not as high. But they might have access to, like they do get sick time in New York. So that's definitely built into that fringe. Your organization might have an employee assistance program that they have access to. So that all is considered fringe for part-time. So in this spreadsheet, I have it set at 22.5%. Again, somewhere in there is probably going to be pretty close for most of our organizations in New York, unless you're teeny tiny. And then there's a section for external departments or like a contracted service you would put in here. You don't have to calculate fringe for that. And so all of those formulas, like I said, are in here. And as you populate these, it will automatically fill in this staffing total number. So that formula is there as well. And then at the bottom is the OTPS, or the, everything else besides people. Places to put the item, whether it's a fixed or a variable expense. So that can help you kind of understand if this is a one-off program versus like a program that you hope to run over and over, or while you're getting the materials, like, are you going to be using these same materials for a different program, that kind of thing. And then you put the quantity and the unit cost. So not the total cost for all of the quantity, and then the total will calculate automatically. A budget code can be helpful. Again, these are the ones that we use at my institution. I left them in just as examples of other things that you might think about. So you can ignore the numbers next to it. That's like our coding system, but you could change this to match the coding system that you have at your institution. And then that would allow you, this is kind of next level. You don't need to know this skill for this, but if you wanted to get fancy and you know how to make pivot tables and things, this would help you make a pivot table to know like exactly which budget lines each of your expenses are coming from or would be coming from. But that, like I said, that's like next leveling up later. So again, all of these OTPS costs, once you put them in, will automatically total over here in the program margin. And then once you kind of got all your expenses listed out, you want to think about the revenue. So for this part, I feel like looking at the example that I already created might be helpful. So I went in and I was thinking about sort of a generic early childhood program. That was my specialty when I was an educator. So I know the expenses for those kinds of things pretty well. So I was thinking about a 2-hour program. So that's the implementation would be 2 hours. And then that required 2 staff. So I put in the full-time, we'll have 1 full-time educator and 1 part-time educator running this program. The full-time educator would be the person writing the curriculum, preparing all the materials. So I put those hours in here as an estimate of like 5 hours at their hourly rate, what their salary would work out to be as hourly rate, the implementation hours, and then it does that math for me of the total for that and automatically calculates the fringe. So you can see if I change this hourly rate to 26, that fringe rate automatically changes. And then that fills in over here. So you know how much time you need to account for in your revenue generation. For a part-time educator, this time will depend on how your part-timers are paid. Like on our team, our part-timers are coming in whether we have programs or not. So I would only consider the time for implementation. But if your part-timers more come in for specific programs, then you have to pay them for at least 4 hours, right? So if they're coming, part-timers need to get paid for at least 4 hours a day if you're calling them in. So you might, if this is the only thing they're coming in to do that day, they're going to have to be there for 4 hours or get paid for 4 hours. So that might be the minimum that you put in for that. But it depends, again, how your institution works. And then once again, those totals and the fringe both calculate automatically. And then this doesn't actually happen for this program that I was thinking about, but if I had like, an animal keeper coming and doing a special presentation for part of the program, then I would calculate like how much, if it was overtime for them, how much their rate might be, which I don't actually, I just made that up, but I hope they get paid more than that. So then that also, all of those things go into, all three of those types go into, the staffing total automatically. And then I did the same thing for the OTPS. So I want to buy a new sensory bin for this program. That is a fixed cost, right? That's something we're going to use. I'm going to get a nice one. We're going to use it over and over for many years. So that is a fixed cost, a one-time cost. But pipe cleaners and paint are going to be variable because they're going to get used up during the program. And I'm going to have to buy more next time that I want to run the program. So you can kind of see, I just made up some stuff. If we wanted to run some marketing ads, that's going to be variable. We might do them, each time we're running this program, we want to run an ad for it, then, or it could be another category we didn't talk about is periodic, which is like something that happens occasionally. So you might have like a subscription to placing ads in a certain newsletter or something. And so that's more of a periodic cost if it's happening regularly. And then, maybe there's some printed materials you need to think about. How much toner are you using? If there's a ton of stuff to print. And then thinking about the different categories that those items would fall into, whether it's supplies and materials, uniforms, promotions, office supplies, that kind of thing. Again, that might not be as important for you at your current level, but it might be information that your supervisor wants to know and needs to think about where that money is coming from the bigger departmental budget. Again, so then in this spreadsheet, those costs calculate total over here. So you can kind of see how much our expenses are so far. And then thinking about revenue, I know our maximum participant for our early childhood programs, the most we can have, usually we charge them as like a caregiver and me, so together. So the toddler and the caregiver come together as one ticket, and we can sell up to 14 of them. So the space in our room would allow us to have up to 14 pairs for this program. And so then I have to think about, I know I can't have more than that because they won't fit. So what price do I need to charge to at least break even, right? Or, make sure I'm not losing money. So if I play around with it at $60 a person, or a pair in this case, it is a revenue total of $840, which offsets my expenses and leads to a margin of positive $62. But $60 is a lot for a 1-2 hour program. Not everybody might be able to afford that, or we might be thinking about, oh, what do I, maybe that's too much. So we can look at what would it look like if I only charge $55? And then you can kind of play with it and be like, oh, then we lose $8 on this program. Is there a way to expand, move it to a bigger room so we can have more people but charge less? And then maybe we can up it to 15 pairs, and then that brings us back to the positive again. So you can kind of play with those numbers to see where is the right fit. Or if it's a program that needs to generate revenue, where do you cut expenses? How much do we need to bring in to make it worth running the program, basically? And kind of thinking about the priorities for the type of program that you're running. If it's a birthday party, that is one of our big revenue generating programs that we use to pay for lots of other things, right? The revenue generated from birthday parties helps offset like our family nature club, which is free. So when we are planning out margins for birthday parties, we really need to make sure that what we are charging does offset our costs enough to then bring in enough revenue to help support those other programs that we want it to support. Does that make sense? Questions from anybody?
Is this like your personal template? Is this something that like will be sent out afterwards? Because it's really nice.
Yes, it will be sent out afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
When considering, I see a question in the chat, when considering the number of participants, do you use the max number that can be accommodated or an estimated number of what past programs have yielded? Great question. Both. You want to think about, it sort of depends what you're using the margin sheet for, right? If you're using it to pitch a new program that you like want to see run, and so you're thinking about, if I want to pitch this program to my boss because I think it'd be really cool, but I want to bring it to them with, some numbers of whether it's feasible or not, you want to do the maximum number. If you're trying to truly figure out if the program is worth running, if it's been running for a while and you're trying to figure out, can we afford to run this program? Then you want to use the numbers that you have from past experience, right? So it kind of depends on how you're using the margin sheet. For planning purposes, in our practice, we typically will we might calculate multiple levels of potential revenue. So we also, you might have different prices for different things. So members versus non-members, or maybe there's like a special group that you give a discount to. Like for our sensory inclusion programs, we have a special partnership with Include NYC, and that they get like a deep discount on their tickets if they book through Include NYC. So that would be like another source of revenue rather than a member or non-member price. You kind of want to, I tend to try to pick the lowest registration price and base it off of that, but then you can play with it. Like it's never going to be everybody at the same price level. But if you're trying to estimate and be conservative, then go with your lower numbers. I usually, in terms of number of participants, I try to think about it as, again, it depends. If it's a new program, I might go with like 25% capacity if we're trying to build it. Or if it's something we've been running for a while and I know it usually fills up, like when we're doing big budget sheets, I usually estimate 75% capacity across the board. And then that kind of tends to balance out. Some things are going to sell out. Some things might only get half fill. But for a specific program, you can start with that 75% capacity number and kind of go from there and adjust as needed. Again, depends how you're using the margin sheet. So Kate asks, what happens if you expect a certain amount of revenue and don't make that much money? Do you already have another program in mind from which you could cover the cost just in case? So that is going to be sort of your department, like whoever runs your departmental budget's job. Our margin sheet is more of a tool, not for the whole department's budget, but for one specific project or program. So, and it's an estimation, right? So it is more of a tool to kind of help you figure out what is a reasonable thing to charge, how much are your expenses truly going to be, because a lot of times they're higher than you might think, or sometimes they might be lower than you think. You're like, oh, this is like a really complicated program, but you realize half the stuff you already have, you don't have to buy it because it's a fixed cost that has already been spent, right? So you don't actually need to factor that price into your margin sheet for this, unless you need to buy a replacement or something. So this is really just a tool to kind of help you organize your thoughts and kind of just break things down to get an objective view of the potential of a program, right? Mm-hmm. So this would be more for estimating, what it could bring in, and then, how it fits into the bigger budget is going to be more for like me as the manager or my boss as the curator or whoever is like overseeing the unit budget, the bigger unit budget.
So, Veronica, with you saying that, would you say like this would be more so for projected revenue? And then let's say if the actual revenue would be in like a separate document, or would you also put actual revenue in this document as well once that event takes place?
Again, it depends on how you're using it, right?
Yeah.
So if you haven't run the program yet and you're like planning it, or it's a new program, it would be potential.
Mm.
If you're trying to evaluate a program and see, um, you know, are or you're trying to figure out if you need to adjust your registration fees or things like that, this could be helpful to put in your actuals here to see what's actually coming in, and then adjust and see what play with the numbers a little bit of like either participant numbers or registration fee numbers to see what gets you to the place where you're comfortable being. Or for us, we did it for our overnights, which, like I said, is a very big, complicated program. And we realized that the amount of time and money that we were spending on it versus how much was actually coming in really meant that that program, and we couldn't make it bigger. We kind of had reached the ceiling of what people would pay for it. Um, and we weren't losing money, but we were only bringing in a little bit, and that wasn't really worth the effort that went into like how much work went into running the program. And so running this margin sheet for that helped us kind of realize maybe this isn't a good use of our time and resources. It might be better to put our time and energy into other programs that are going to have a better reach and a better margin for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I see another question. This might be one we want to hold to the end about building a department budget, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
save that one till the end. I do want to um, give you all a chance. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. I do want to give you all a chance. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, we're good. Okay. To do some practice. So I want to put, where did my document? I'm gonna put the link for this margin sheet in here in the chat. And then maybe I'm gonna try to put it in the chat. Hold, please. Copy link. There. So you can pull it up. You'll notice down at the bottom I have tabs. One says practice. You can do one of two things. You can either make a copy of that, like duplicate that worksheet in this form and practice on your, I have a practice exercise for you to do, or you can like copy and paste this into your own document if you prefer, like your own Google Doc. If you transfer it into, like copy it into an Excel spreadsheet, the formulas may not copy. So it copies best into another Google Drive thing. But if you want to just for this practice round, duplicate and make your own tab to work off of. There's a lot of us, so that might get complicated. But we'll see how it goes. I wasn't sure how many people were going to show up today. So where did my presentation go? I lost it. Oh no. Hang on. I accidentally closed my oh no, I didn't. It's just on a different tab. All right, there we go. All right. So, did that already? Okay. Thinking about changing slides, maybe. Whoops, now it went over. Of course, we went much. Okay, there we go. Pause that. Oh, I know why I did that. There we go. All right, so we're gonna take 5 minutes to give you time to practice doing a margin sheet. And you might not finish it, but I just want you to kind of have a chance to throw some numbers in, see what happens. So you can kind of play around with it. So I want you to think about a small program or workshop that you run on a regular basis, or at least something you're very familiar with, what the expenses are, and list out all of the expenses involved with running that program, including the staffing time for preparation and implementation. Fill in the revenue columns, and then just kind of play with it and see, just so you can see what happens. I'm going to set a 5-minute timer, and then we'll come back together and share. So I'm just going to give you some time to play, and I'll leave the timer up here. It's running down at the bottom so you can see it. Yeah. And I'll leave the chat where I can see it. So if any questions pop up while you're working, I can try to answer those. Timer was not running. Ooh, shoot. So proud of myself for that fancy timer, and now it's not working. Okay, well, we're gonna have to eyeball the time because my timer's not working the way that I planned. But we'll take about 2 more minutes because we do need to wrap up a little bit to get back to the main room. All right. I know that was not 5 minutes, but I am being told that we're going to come back together soon. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to kind of share any revelations you had, any questions that kind of came up while you were doing something, or any last questions you have related to program budgets and margin sheets. Glad you're finding the sheet helpful. I think it's great too. I can't take credit for creating it, but
And if Veronica, if it seems like there are not additional questions at this moment, there was that question about building a department budget and what needed to be considered.
yeah, sure. We can touch on that. We might get um, pulled back into the main room, but I'll cover as much as I can. So I, as I mentioned at the beginning, in my role, I mostly oversee the programming budget from the materials standpoint. I don't oversee the personnel budget. My boss does that part of it, and she also manages the revenue. So, but I help her when she's sort of planning out our departmental budget and what we need. So the things that we have to think about is how is our staff being funded? How much revenue do we need to generate to offset any grant? You know, a lot of our positions are funded by grants or like donor funding. So what percentage of our budget do we need to offset with revenue? So how much revenue do we need to generate? How much do we think is going to come from different types of programs? So like our family and children's programs versus our school programs versus, you know, adult programs, things like that. General audience programs. Usually we look at them as general audience versus school programs to break it down. And then we think about, we've done margin sheets for every single one of our types of programs. So we kind of know how much revenue comes in or could potentially come in for each one, each type. So we think about how many of each do we want to run that makes sense for that type of program. And